So I've got a story, Mike.
Sounds good.
It's about a trip to the urologist.
Okay. Sounds less good.
So I'm 55 and I have to go to the doctor once a year at the moment. Never been to any doctors before in my whole life. So the trip to the urologist, and the urologist says to me, he says, Tim, you have to start clenching. So
Okay.
clenching your muscles down in where you sit. So wherever you sit, clench everything there. And I said, why? He says, well, you'll thank me when you're 75. I said, no, 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 you have to give me more than that. And he says, well, when you get old as a man, then going to the toilet either becomes difficult or it becomes uncontrollable. And the process of clenching will seize up those muscles and make sure that there's practice in those muscles to help you in those embarrassing situations when you're 75. Yeah. So I called my dad and I was speaking to my dad about this. I said, do you clench? And he says, oh, you've got to clench. You've got to clench. And so I'm clenching all the time. Yeah. In meetings, on the train, in cars, on telephones. And I'm also linking it with a core clench, the tensing the core, which apparently is good. I'm tall, so I need back strength. And so there's a tense of the core, there's a clench, and there's a breathing technique behind it, which I've now been doing for 5 years. It's not there yet because I do forget it, but I'm trying to get it into the place where it becomes more normal to do it than not, if you know what I mean. So it's that
Mm.
habit building kind of technique that is behind it. And I don't know the science behind it, but I've been assured that there are many good things that happen when you do these things.
I mean, I've also heard about this. I believe they're called Kegel or Kegel exercises.
Yeah, yeah.
I have to admit, I've never rang my dad up and asked him if he clenches, and I don't intend to. But it's an interesting idea, Tim. So what's the story here? What's the lesson that we should learn from this?
Well, let me follow it up with a different one. I've got a couple of kids, one princess and one terrorist. And when the terrorist, he's taller than me now, when he was back in the day, when he was pulling all of his best behavior, I went to see an anger management therapist. Yeah, in order to deal with very real, massive anger that I very often feel, and then started getting in touch with a couple of people who specialized in this. And one of the techniques for anger management was a very, very practical one. It was this: you clench your fists either with the thumb or without the thumb, it doesn't really matter. And you keep them clenched and you clench them as hard as you can. And you keep them clenched basically for as long as you want. Yeah. It's incredibly difficult to keep them clenched for more than a minute. But if you can keep them clenched for a long, 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 long time, then you're taking frustration and thought and energy and you're pushing it into a part of your body where it has a job to do, clenching the fists. And you're reducing other areas of whatever else is going on in your brain. So you're pushing the stress to a different place and you're pushing the anger into a different part of you. And I think that's the kind of metaphysical idea behind it. The big advantage is when you release your fists, all of the blood rushes through there, and there is an amazing relaxation period that follows. So the Shaolin monks and the martial artists will very often use this as a primary relaxation technique. They don't focus on the clench fisting or the fist clenching. They focus on the reward to that, which is the relaxation that comes after 4 minutes of intensive clenching your fists. The thing that I find very interesting because it sends mental thought and energy into a part of your body where it has a proactive and sensible job to do. And I think that is one of the things that can build a good habit.
I think this idea is really interesting. I was watching it wasn't a Pilates instructional video, but it was about Pilates, and they were saying that they did a 60-minute Pilates program where Pilates is a lot of holding positions and tensing certain muscles and building your core, etc. And they said at the end of it, you had 5 minutes. The last exercise was just lying on the mat. And they said in those 5 minutes, you feel a very intense relaxation. And a lot of their customers actually fell asleep. And they described that as the reward. And when I was thinking about it, I thought, it doesn't sound like much of a reward, 5 minutes lying there. But in terms of what's happening in your body, how you feel, the relaxation, I think it absolutely makes sense. And I think the fist clenching is almost kind of a miniature on the go way of creating this same impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think I've tried it myself. I think it works really well. There's also things like stress balls. I think actually it's effectively the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it makes a lot of sense to me, and I have used it, and it does not just for anger, but for, as in your example, but for also for stress, for anxiety. I think just that focus and getting the blood flowing around your body and putting your intention on somewhere outside of your mind is really, really useful.
And I'm sure there are a lot of our viewers are going to be sports people in one way, shape, or form. And so the intensive sporting activity that people go through is a similar process to this. And I have a friend at the moment who literally walks a fast walk every morning to work. And he walks for about 55 minutes there and 55 minutes back. And he has a very, very stressful job. He's a nurse. And he says, without this walk, he would be a wreck. And so his walk in the morning there, where he's building up for the day, and his walk back in the evening, where he's coming down from the day, he says is absolutely his thing, and makes a massive, massive difference. He feels to his working environment as well.
Just to add to that, Tim, that I was recently reading a study they did about commuting. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about the way in which governments and companies approach the question of commuting, which is always faster is better, right? How quickly can I get you from where you are to where you want to be? But when they were talking about commuting for work in particular, they found that actually it's not always beneficial to be as fast as possible. They found that actually a window of between 30 to 50 minutes was the best commute time in terms of the effect that it had. Whereas if you take, an hour or more, of course, that can take too long and too much time out of your day. But if it's faster than 30 minutes, if it's 10 minutes or 20 minutes, what you lose is the separation, right? The separation between where you live, where your leisure time is, where your relaxation time is, and where you work and where you're productive, etc. And so they were talking about a new way of thinking about commuting and train travel, etc., where you can offer a more leisurely or potentially slightly slower, but nicer journey, and there's actually a kind of psychological benefit for that. But the idea of having this gap and this separation between where you live versus where you work, I think, is also a really interesting one.
So, reflection questions again. Do I do some of this stuff? If I do, how do I do it? If I don't, is there some stuff here that I could think about incorporating into my daily routine and habits? What do I think of these different concepts? Enjoy the discussion.